One of the many good things to come out of Ronan Farrow's exposure of Harvey Weinstein's horrendous assaults on women are the voices of the countless women and men coming forward with secrets they have been intimidated into keeping for what must seem to them a lifetime. Intimidation at the hands of another person who holds some level of power over them, or by self-imposed shame, or more than likely, a little of both. Since these stories of sexual assault and abuse have come to light, I have contemplated shedding some of my own Me Too Time's Up stories. Not necessarily to shame the perpetrators, as I now live a life of forgiveness, but more to shed the weight of the memories from my shoulders and clear the corner of my brain that has housed these memories for many years. Although some level of intimidation contributed to my own silence, I believe my silence really comes from contemplation that perhaps I did something to cause the unwanted experiences. As I recount the details leading up to and during my own Me Too encounters, I have come to realize that although I may have thought of myself as having been a tough, take-no-shit adult, which is a deep contrast to the youth that I lived when I was shy and meek, I believe there is something in my personality that unknowingly invited certain men to prey on my vulnerabilities that no doubt took root as a direct result of the sexual abuse I endured as a 4-year-old child. The first encounter I would like to share occurred shortly after I moved to New York City in 1992, after being spotted in my apartment building elevator at 31 East 31st Street by a photographer named Alonzo. He was a tall, slender, poised, hip black man whose voice I recall being as deep as Barry White's. Although not my type, he was noticeably attractive. I, on the other hand, was simply dressed in jeans, t-shirt, and loafers, and wore no makeup in those days, save for a little mascara and lip gloss. Alonzo was already in the elevator as I rushed through the glass door pleading, "Hold the elevator, please," then thanked him as I briskly walked into the elevator. As our eyes met, I immediately gave a half smile to the gentleman who seemed to hold a lot of authority without speaking a word. As I often did when I felt uncomfortably nervous around men, I immediately looked down at the floor, hoping he would not say another word after "You're welcome." Unfortunately, a few seconds later, he asked whether I was a model as he pulled out one of his business cards. I was, and just so happened to be returning from a go-see with my portfolio in hand. He said his studio was upstairs and offered to look at my portfolio. Before I could answer, he held out his hand and waited for me to give him my oversized portfolio. As he flipped through the pages, Alonzo boasted of working with supermodels and told how I could be more marketable in New York City agencies after booking just one session with him. He further quipped that I needed more editorial-style shots of me on the streets of New York, as all of my photographs up to that point had been taken in various studios throughout Boston. About a week later, and a $600 cash advance to my Citibank Visa I could not afford, I was on 14th Street posing for Alonzo in Union Square. At the end of the 1-hour shoot, Alonzo invited me to meet him at his studio the next day to review the test sheet and choose which shots to print for my portfolio. Because he acted professionally each time I met with him, I felt safe and quickly let my guard down. Several days later, when I went up to pick up my prints, he was setting up his studio for another photo shoot. As I reviewed the test sheet, he received a phone call canceling the photo shoot he was preparing for that morning, So he asked if I wanted to take some indoor shots since his studio was already staged with lighting, props, and 2 other cameras. He was a legitimate photographer, so though I was breaking my self-imposed rule of not being alone with a male photographer in an enclosed place, I jumped at the opportunity to have him take additional photos of me because he had earlier convinced me that my portfolio needed a more New York feel. And after all, he had shown me the plethora of photos that he had claimed to have taken of some of my favorite models of the day: Veronica Webb, Gabrielle Reese, and Christy Turlington. As the camera clicked, I adjusted each pose ever so slightly, a skill all professional models did so not to move too quickly, creating a blurred image. However, each time I tilted my head or slightly turned my upper body, he barked, "Relax your neck." Because I felt completely relaxed, I didn't know what he was talking about. From behind the camera, he'd further command, "Relax your shoulders," and "Relax your jaw, you're too tense." But again, until he relentlessly ordered me to relax, I thought and felt that I was. After several minutes of this, he frustratingly asked if I was okay. I assured him that I was, and just didn't understand what he was talking about. He put down his camera and asked me to have a seat on his office sofa. He proceeded to ask why I wanted to be a model. Why was I so rigid? And then asked me to tell him about the men in my life. He particularly wanted to know about my relationship with my dad, as well as whether I had a boyfriend. Because Alonzo kept a safe distance from me and wasn't invading my space, I still felt relatively comfortable. However, his dissatisfaction with my posing ability made me uncomfortable because he professed to be well known. And something another photographer I had previously worked with in Boston said to me kept replaying in my head. "This is a small town. Models and photographers talk, so watch what you say about one or the other." Because Alonzo led me to believe he was so well connected in the industry, particularly New York City, I didn't want Alonzo to suggest to other photographers or agencies they not work with me. So yes, I wanted to please him. Within minutes of the pseudo-therapy session, he asked how old I was when I lost my virginity. That was a question I dreaded anyone ever asking me because I didn't know whether I was supposed to cite the year my high school senior Christian boyfriend and I first did it, or cite when my stepfather first sexually molested me when I was 4 years old. Instantaneously, Alonzo saw me struggle with the answer, and before any words left my mouth, he blurted out, "You are not the first one to be molested as a child. You can't go through life so tense over something that happened so long ago." Shocked and speechless at his discernment, I immediately froze. I tried to widen my eyes to prevent the tears from welling up, but they steadily flowed anyways. As I sank into the sofa, I became extremely uncomfortable and vulnerable. He then asked whether I wanted him to help me stop thinking of sexuality as a terrible thing. From that point, everything sounded like he was speaking in an echo. My naivete prevented me from processing what he meant in the moment, so I shyly answered through the tears, "I don't know." He asked if I was ready to grow up and leave the little girl behind. For the first time that day, I felt my body tense up. My shoulders locked up at my ears as I attempted to shrug. His deep, authoritative voice softened to a whisper as he gently blindfolded me and began to perform oral sex on me. He kept telling me to relax, but I couldn't. I didn't. He kept telling me to think of someplace beautiful, but all I could see was the black space behind the scarf he blindfolded me with. After a certain amount of time that felt like a lifetime, he must have realized I was getting no pleasure from this because he finally stopped. I didn't know what any of that did for him, but all it did for me was deepen my distrust of men more than I already did. Alonzo then had the nerve to claim I looked more relaxed and ready to resume the photo shoot. But he couldn't have been further from the truth. He was merely lying to himself out loud to convince himself or to convince his conscience that I wanted him to violate me. Trying to suppress the disdain from showing on my face, I agreed to go back to the photo shoot where I was fully clothed. Although I wanted to run out of his studio/apartment, I stayed. However, after that day, I did not allow myself to ever be alone with him again. In fact, the next and final time I shot with him was weeks later, but that time a female makeup artist and another female model were present and part of the photo shoot. At the time, I knew I hated what had transpired, but I was more angry at myself for somehow getting into that situation. But because I knew it could have been worse, I chalked it up as something I had to go through to toughen up. I wish I could say that was the last time I found myself in a Me Too situation, but it wasn't. Vividly, I remember being called into my boss's office, a U.S. representative I admired tremendously and lobbied hard to work for after working on the Clinton Gore re-election campaign in 1996. The staff and I were all very excited to have him back in Harlem for a week, where he scheduled a meeting with each of my coworkers and me to get caught up on what was going on in his district and to let him know which projects we were working on. I was particularly excited because it would be my first one-on-one meeting with Charles B. Rangel since getting hired a year earlier, and I was very much looking forward to telling him how honored and excited I still was to be part of his team, and how proud I was of his hard work and dedication to his constituents and the country as the ranking member of the very coveted and prestigious Ways and Means Committee. Nervous as our office manager, Vivian Jones, called me to say Mr. Rangel was ready to meet with me, I got up from my desk and walked past my coworker, Dure Starrett, who cheered, "Good luck, girl." Everyone in the office knew how excited and enthusiastic I was for this meeting. With an ear-to-ear smile, eyes wide open, and a pounding heart, I didn't want to forget to say everything I wanted to. I knocked on his door. "Come in," invited the raspy-voiced gentleman from the other side. "Mr. Rangel, it's so good to see you, sir," I replied as I opened the door. "YaVaughnie, come in, have a seat." He proceeded to tell me how happy it made him to hear from my coworkers of the excellent job I was doing, and that staff of other elected officials who worked in the Harlem State Office building reported to him that I was having a significant impact on the community. After describing the projects I was working on, as well as updating him on several community meetings I had been attending, Mr. Rangel said, "To show my appreciation for everything you're doing in representing me when I'm in D.C., I want you to have this." He stood up and handed me an envelope and continued, "I wish I could do more, but it's an election year, so I have a tight budget." I got the impression he wanted me to open the envelope right there, so I did. "Oh, Mr. Rangel, this is so generous. Thank you, sir." He walked from behind his desk toward me, so I greeted him the way I greet all my friends and family. I hugged him. As I tried to step away, he held the hug longer than what was a comfortable greeting, then kissed me on the lips. In spite of the fact he just shocked me, I did not want him to know he stunned me, so immediately, but calmly, I stepped back and thanked him again. "Thank you so much, sir," I said. "If there's anything I could do for your district, just Say the word. Confused and disappointed in myself, I walked out and gently closed the door behind me. What just happened? I thought. My entire body went cold, and all the voices around me sounded as if they were coming through a tunnel. As I briskly breezed past their desks, my coworkers demanded the scoop. "YaVaughnie!" "YaVaughnie," inquired Maritza Sanchez, "did you get a bonus?" Gleefully, DeRay asked, "Well, how'd it go?" In a fog, my own inner voice resounded, "Oh no, what did I just cause to happen? Is he going to try that again? Will he go farther next time? Why did I hug him?" My excitement to work for the then most powerful, influential Democrat on the Hill, who also, by the way, ran New York City politics, turned into me wondering how I could avoid being alone with him going forward. But more importantly, I knew I couldn't immediately tell anyone because I was an outsider from below 96th Street working in the male-dominated playground of local politics in Harlem. They were just waiting for me to screw up or complain about something, so I made every effort to prove them wrong. In fact, during a group dinner after a community meeting, several of my counterparts told me of the wager they all had entered when I was first hired. None of them thought I was tough enough to work in Harlem politics. All of this was quickly going through my head as I answered my coworkers. "It went great," I lied. "Yes," I replied as I presented to them the $500 check Mr. Rangel had given me. "He said he wished he could do more when he..." My spirit was crushed and I wanted to cry. It was not long after that I left Mr. Rangel's office to work for a friend who ran for lieutenant governor. Everyone thought I was crazy for leaving, but after that experience in his office, with an outer office full of staffers, I jumped at the opportunity to get away from Mr. Rangel's office. It's easy to say I should have reported the incident or immediately quit after it happened, but I needed my job to pay my rent, so I stayed. But Me Too instances are not always so jarring that they leave you feeling violated or dismayed, per se. They can also leave you feeling sorry for the person perpetrating his misconduct on you. For instance, in 2001, I had already established a friendship with Charles, who went by Chuck Phillips, while we both worked at Morgan Stanley Dean Witter. When one bitter, cold, snowy evening we were out in the village listening to live music at Cafe Wa, that the course of our friendship changed. It was fun hanging out with Chuck at the time because we discussed and debated local and national politics of the day and had an affinity for several genres of music not typical to black people. I was not physically attracted to him, nor did he flirt with me, so never once in the preceding months we met for cocktails and political discussion was there any doubt or desire on my part that we were more than platonic friends. As the band went on break after its soulful rendition of a Jimi Hendrix song, Chuck leaned across the table and softly said to me, "I got us a hotel room for the night." He looked nervous, but as always conveyed what I construed to be the utmost respect. Shocked and speechless at the invitation that came from nowhere, I panicked. I leaned back in my chair as my mind raced and I tried to quickly process what he just said. Hotel, but we're just friends. And I have holes in my leggings. I can't go to a hotel room with him. I haven't shaved in weeks, were all thoughts that raced through my mind. I became anxious because I absolutely did not know how to say no without hurting his feelings as a friend. As a friend, I cared about him and liked him very much. In the 10 seconds since he threw that ever so shy invitation out on the table, I saw as he embarrassedly looked down at his glass and quietly sipped the last quarter-inch of the rum punch in his glass. To comfort and relieve him from the awkwardness, I said, "Well, okay then, I guess we should leave." Although his arm was around me and we sat close to each other, the entire cab ride from the village to Midtown was in silence, save for the radio playing. I was hoping his hotel had a bar so that I wouldn't have to go to his room, because I was not prepared emotionally or aesthetically to take my clothes off or to be intimate with him. Aside from the fact it had been 2 years since I was with my last sexual partner, Chuck and I had never discussed having sex with each other. When we arrived at the W Hotel in Midtown East, just below Grand Central Station, I was elated to see that there was a bar and that there were several groups of people sitting around having cocktails. However, we quickly learned that last call had already gone into effect, so my elation reverted back to panic. I did not want to go up to his room, not because I was repulsed by him or because I was necessarily a prude. It was now more about the fact that I knew the black DKNY tights I was wearing under my burnt orange chalk-in pants had holes in the crotch and the right foot big toe. Not to mention it had been years since I was on birth control. Although he had already months earlier told me he had filed for divorce and had not been intimate with his son's mom since she tricked him into getting pregnant 5 years earlier, I did not know anything about his sexual past or present. As he proceeded to the concierge desk to check in, I opted to wait for him at the elevator bank so I could think of how the heck I was going to get out of this situation and keep his friendship. With any other man, I would have been able to say, "No, thank you, I'm going home." But after hearing him talk of not having a social life, not having many friends he hung out with, and having limited experience with women since he felt pressured to marrying at a young age, I had become protective of him and felt as if I needed to take care of him. Chuck was so generous to others that I didn't think there was a manipulative bone in his body, so I felt sorry for him. After checking in, he reappeared where I was waiting with a cocktail in each hand, a sidecar for him, and apple martini for me. Oh, thank God, I thought. Maybe all we'll do is talk, I reasoned in my head. Then I'll say it's getting late and leave. It was, after all, a Thursday night, and although I had Fridays off from work, he did not. When we got to the room, he opened the door, turned on the heat, and walked toward the back into the bedroom of the suite to put down his bag, which I assumed throughout the evening was his computer and work bag, which he always carried. I stood by the door, still not knowing what the heck to do, when he walked over to me and began kissing me. Oh man, I dreaded and accepted. I guess this is going to happen. He led me to the bedroom where I reluctantly undressed as he undressed. Never once did I say no to him outright. I don't know that any of my hesitation at Cafe Wa or at the W or the fact that he was a superior to me should have stopped him, but I definitely felt pressured. The next day, I called and gingerly quipped, "What the heck are we doing?" I have always had male friends that I hang out with, but never once before has a friendship crossed over the line as we had done. I also expressed my concern that we had not I also expressed my concern that we had had unprotected sex because he and I did not discuss being sexual partners and that I was not on birth control. And in spite of the fact he kept saying that night that everything was okay, I didn't know what he meant by that. To which he explained that he had gotten a vasectomy and had not had sex with anyone since the 9 months before his 4.5-year-old son was born. Unlike the previous two situations, that most uncomfortable night with Charles turned into an 8.5 years relationship where I often felt sorry for him and empathized as he proceeded with his divorce, and even as he solicited and conspired throughout 2002 to murder his son's mother, because as he cried, she began making the impending divorce difficult by threatening to keep their son from him and take all of his money. Charles rented various houses in 2002 where this was to take place. In March 2002, Charles rented a house in Burlington, Vermont. When that did not work out, he next conspired to use his house in Atlanta, Georgia, which also did not work out for him. Charles then rented a house in Catskills, New York, twice, where his last-ditched effort did not pan out. And more details on this in a separate Me Too post. What I have learned from reading the experiences of other women is that Me Too experiences are valid, regardless of whether I stayed in the studio, continued to work for the person, or carried on a long-term relationship with the man. Each of these men acted inappropriately with me and violated regulations, ethics, and/or laws with their malevolent behavior. But thanks to the Me Too and Time's Up movements, it is no longer my burden to continue to keep their secrets. I am free.